Well, hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about 10 fantasy series that I plan on starting, hopefully, in the not too distant future. I've done, I feel like, a pretty decent job this last year in making some progress through some fantasy series that at least were interesting to me, looked interesting, were on my TBR. And so these are 10 more, besides the ones that I've already read, that have been on my TBR that I'm interested in getting to. I'm not committing to reading all of these, especially not in their entirety, in this next year, 2026. But they're at least on my radar, and some of them I think are pretty likely that I'll get to them before too long. So we're going to start out with the first series, and first because it is actually a pretty high priority, and this is going to be the Collation Saga by Andrew D. Meredith. Now, the observant viewers of the channel are going to say, hey Sam, didn't you read Deathless Beast, book 1 in the Collation Saga already? And the truth is I did. Read it a couple of months ago. Actually, that's not true. I listened to it a couple of months ago and really enjoyed it. But after listening to it, I realized I would get more out of this book and the Collation Saga as a whole if I actually physically read them. Meredith is doing some really interesting things in these books, and it's dense enough that I wanted to sight read it and go a bit slower than maybe my audio paces. So I plan on rereading Deathless Beast, using my eyes this time, and that's why I invested in the first 4 Collation books that are currently out right now. So that is the first series that I plan on reading, or at least starting again, in the not too distant future. The next series is going to be the Witchy War books by D.J. Butler. And I actually don't have any of these physically, so I'm going to hold up a collection of short stories that has some set in the Witchy War world. The two-sentence pitch where everybody compares everything to Game of Thrones for the Witchy War series has been compared to The Last of the Mohicans meets Game of Thrones. My good friend and indie author A.C. Wilson has said that actually the Witchy War books are the closest thing that he's read, and he's read a lot of fantasy, to evoking that feeling of political intrigue that Game of Thrones has, but in these Witchy War books, which are sort of like alternate history, colonial, maybe Appalachian fantasy. I first heard about these books from Christopher Ruocchio. They came very highly recommended. I've now read 5 other books by D.J. Butler, most notably his Cunning Man books, which I adore. I thoroughly love. So I want to read his epic fantasy series. That's definitely like American history and myth inspired. I think it's an alternate history series. So the Witchy War series is high on the TBR. The next series that I would like to get to soon is going to be the Warhammer books. So if you would have asked me a year ago, I would have been shocked that this is on the list. I would have said I have no interest in Warhammer, in playing any of the tabletop games, any of the video games, and certainly not reading any of the Warhammer novels. But times have changed. I listened to a few podcasts where some people were talking about the lore of Warhammer, and it was very different from the aforementioned Sun Eater series by Christopher Ruocchio, but there's similar elements with space empires and space battles, and I actually, somewhat accidentally, collected a few Warhammer novels without even having started any. How many do you ask? I now have 7 Warhammer novels without having read even one. So this is the first Warhammer novel in the Horus Heresy series. This is Horus Rising by Dan Abnett. I also have the first 3 Gaunt's Ghosts books in the omnibus bind-up, and I have Dan Abnett's Eisenhorn trilogy as well, all of which I've heard good things about. I've definitely heard that Dan Abnett is the place to start when it comes to Warhammer books. So some of the military ideas, empire ideas, and even the religious things and the different cults that exist in the Warhammer world are of interest to me, and I want to see what all the hype is about. So I have read some other tie-in fiction, most notably like some of the Star Wars novels. I've even read some video game tie-in fiction like the God of War novelization, and most of the time I'm not terribly impressed. Some of them are entertaining enough, but there's very few that I read that I'm like, oh my goodness, that's just great. But my interest has been piqued with the Warhammer books, so I'm at least going to give them a try. I've got a bit of an investment in them. The next series is going to be the Keepers trilogy by David Dalglish, the first book being this, Soul Keeper. So this last year, in 2025, one of my biggest surprises and books that I really enjoyed was The Radiant King by David Dalglish. And when I got a chance to talk to him, he said out of all the 30-some books that he's published, he thought that this trilogy would be the one that was most to my taste and to the things that interest me. He said that it's like if, in the Game of Thrones series, you have magic slowly working its way back into the world and the characters encountering that. He said his quick pitch for this trilogy would be what would happen if you had a similar type of fantasy world, but one day you wake up and all the magic returned overnight. And so suddenly you have priests who have been, praying for people to get healed after all this time, and they've not seen anything. And then one day, overnight, everybody's been healed because of the prayers that they've prayed. Or you have people now hunting down, trying to find old spell books or prayer books, trying to figure out hey, what's actually going on here. So that sounds really interesting to me. I really liked The Radiant King a lot, and I even read Dalglish's some of his Lit RPG books, which is not his normal fare, but I thought was excellent with my vast experience of reading Lit RPG. Not. This sounds more up my alley, and definitely something that I'm interested in checking out soon. Another trilogy from David Dalglish. The next trilogy is going to be The Milkweed Triptych by Ian Tregillis. So once again, this last year, I read the Alchemy Wars trilogy by Ian Tregillis. This was part of a read-along that Alan from the Library of Alexandria hosted, and I got to be a part of, and I really enjoyed that trilogy a lot. It's alternate history, and this is also an alternate history. The Milkweed Triptych series, I think, is alternate history from World War II into the Cold War, where the Germans in the conflict have got some sort of superheroes that they've created to fight for them. And so to combat that, the English and the Allies start to harness demons to fight for them, which sounds bizarre and like an interesting conflict that you could explore in that series. All I know is that Tregillis is kind of known for writing this alternate history stuff. I think he's even written for the Wild Card series that George Martin edits. But having really enjoyed the Alchemy War series, I want to give his other stuff a chance. I think he has a standalone, a fantasy standalone as well, called maybe Something Other Than Night. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but I'm also going to read that too at some point. I enjoyed that first trilogy that I read from him so much that I'm going to read. I mean, he hasn't written a lot, so I'm going to read all of his. I'm going to read all of his published works, which is 7. So we're almost halfway there. So definitely on the list here. The next trilogy is going to be the Song of Albion trilogy by Stephen R. Lawhead. So I really have enjoyed the Pendragon Cycle books by Stephen Lawhead that I've read, but it's hard to call an author that you've read a favorite author if you've only read one series from them. What especially comes to mind is people who say Robert Jordan or George Martin is one of my favorite authors, and it's but have you just read the one series from him? Are you a fan of that series, or are you a fan of their broader works? Go read Robert Jordan's Conan stuff. Go read, Night Flyers by George Martin. So in a similar vein, as much as I love the Pendragon Cycle by Lawhead, before I call him a favorite fantasy author of mine, I want to read more of his stuff. And the Song of Albion series, I've heard consistently from people who have read a lot of Lawhead stuff, that this is one of his better series. This trilogy is much more fantasy than the historical fiction stuff that he does, or even in the Pendragon Cycle where he's kind of mixing historical fiction and fantasy. This is just straight up fantasy and deals a lot with, I think, Irish myth as well, which you see a little bit of that in the Pendragon Cycle already, where you have this synthesis of actual history and these mythic elements, some of them explicitly Irish, that he brings into that series that I really liked. So anyway, I'm interested to check this out. I do love these cheesy 90s covers that just have our protagonist just buff and shirtless on them, and he's shirtless on every cover in this trilogy, which just cracks me up. So yeah, definitely one that I'm looking forward to getting to. And now we get to a trilogy that I call sort of a rainy day read for me. So there are certain fantasy series, just because so much is being put out, and especially on BookTube, if you just go after like what everybody's talking about at the moment, you'll be overwhelmed with your Robin Hobbs and John Gwynns and Joe Abercrombies and, oh, here, read like 200 books. And so there are some authors that I've just decided, like, I'm not terribly interested in their stuff, at least not right now. And then there's other series that I've just decided, just not yet. Just kind of putting it on a back shelf. We'll get to it someday, and I'll probably like it. I fully expect to like it, but we'll just save that ace. We'll keep it in the hole for now. And one of those series, I called it a trilogy because it's just 3 books right now, but is the Gentlemen Bastards books by Scott Lynch. So The Lies of Locke Lamora, Red Seas Under Red Skies, and Republic of Thieves. I've heard almost nothing but praise for these books. They sound right up my alley. People often compare them to the Kingkiller books by Pat Rothfuss, which I also really like. Fantasy heist stories, what's not to love? So I'm pretty certain that I'm really going to enjoy these books, but I'm just hanging on to them for a rainy day. So they're on the TBR, and I almost pulled the trigger and did them this year, but I think I might save them for 2026, or maybe later, depending on how the muse leads one. Nearing the end here, another series that I want to get to, and this is kind of something a little bit different, is The Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander. My friend Jay from A Contemplative Reader has recommended this to me and said that he thinks it's one of the more underrated fantasy series, that because it's middle grade, a lot of people don't read it nowadays. But that doesn't seem to stop people when they're reading, say, like Harry Potter, which a lot of adults read, or even the Earthsea books, which a lot of adults also go back and read. So I want to read the Prydain books. Obviously, book 2 was adapted into the Disney movie, The Black Cauldron, maybe infamously adapted as that. But I have the whole set. I mean, these are super short books. I mean, they're middle grade for Pete's sake, and it's less than 200 pages. So I don't expect these to be heavy or difficult reads or anything like that. But Jay and also Philip Chase have highly recommended these and said there's a lot that you can still get out of them. The way he plays with myth, the way he writes in a more folk fairy tale style, is something that I'm really interested in. So on the TBR. The second to last series that we'll say here is going to be The Stories of Solomon Kane by Robert E. Howard. So earlier this year, I decided to set aside a month and just read through all of the Conan stories by Robert E. Howard. I'd read some, but not all of them, and greatly enjoyed them. And I want to read more Howard, and so Solomon Kane is sort of the obvious next step. He is a Puritan who fights monsters. What's not to like? I've read a few of these stories, but I want to read all of them. So I've got this great bind-up that Del Rey does. These are fully illustrated, just like the Conan Del Rey bind-up is. So really good quality volume here. And I plan on reading these, hopefully in the not-too-distant future. I mean, short stories are great. You can squeeze them in between larger reads if you just need a palate cleanser, if you just need something else for a day without committing to a big, large book. I think short stories work perfectly for that and are honestly pretty underrated. And then the last series that we're going to put here is, we'll just make it a generic, something by Gene Wolfe. The main series that I have from him that I still need to read is I need to finish up the Solar Cycle with the Book of the Short Sun. I still need to read the Wizard Knight duology, and I also need to read the Latro books, which I think there's 3 of them, starting with Soldier of the Mist. So I'm not sure which of these 3 options I'm going to get to first, but rest assured, I'll probably be reading something Gene Wolfe in the not-too-distant future in 2026. So that's a pretty safe bet that we can make here. Yeah, guys, I'm sure many of you have heard of a bunch of these series, if not read a bunch of them, so let me know what you think. I'm especially interested in hearing how many of you guys have read either Butler's Witchy War books or any of the Warhammer novels. That'll be something that's a little bit different, so let me know if any of these you're more interested in, or if any of them are on your TBR. So thank you guys for watching this. Let me know what you think down below. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.